September 19th, 1944. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight. Narrow tracks between standing spruce became liquid mud. Fog clung to the trunks so thick that soldiers of the 60th Infantry Regiment, part of the 9th Infantry Division, could only see a few steps in front of them. That morning, as men moved into the trees, no one realized they were entering a landscape that would be called later by some survivors a green hell, a place where weather, wood, and enemy all conspired to turn every advance into a close, deadly test of endurance. The objective was simple to planners on a map: capture the Schwammenauel Dam and open the route toward the Ruhr Basin. The operational orders came from 1st U.S. Army headquarters, but intelligence had underestimated German strength and prepared defenses. Hürtgen was not just a forest, it was a deliberate defensive system, an interconnected network of trenches, log-reinforced bunkers, camouflaged MG positions, and pre-registered artillery zones, established and manned by veterans of earlier Western Front battles. Elements of the 275th Infantry Division initially contested the approaches. Later, the Germans reinforced with companies and battalions from 353rd and 272nd Volksgrenadier Divisions. Commanders such as Lieutenant General Hans Schmidt and field leaders within those formations turned every ridge and ravine into a firing position. They understood that the enemy would be forced to move along narrow lanes of approach. They prepared to ambush those lanes. The 9th Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Lewis A. Craig, entered the fight first. On day 1, the division's 1st Battalion, 61st Regiment, ran into something American doctrine had trouble describing: an enemy that fired from concealment at point-blank ranges and then melted back into the trees. German MG-42 positions, often covered with fresh logs and branchwork, snapped fire from unexpected positions. The battlefield swallowed voice and radio. Communications failed. The SCR-300 radios had been essential in open-country tactics, but in dense woodland the frequency was choked by static. Tree canopies severed antenna lines, and simple human confusion replaced coordinated maneuver. Officers began to write the same phrase in successive reports: "We cannot see the enemy." On September 24th, the 47th Infantry Regiment attempted to take Hill 400, a key elevation overlooking the Germeter Road. Colonel Edwin H. Gibson, commanding the regiment, later summarized the daily reality. "Every yard cost us men. We had no idea where the enemy was, but he always knew where we were." That single line appears in after-action reports and letters home, a short sentence that reveals the grinding arithmetic of loss. German engineers enhanced the danger. Tellermine anti-tank charges were concealed under leaf litter. S-mines, the infamous Bouncing Betty, were emplaced along narrow tracks. Concealed trip devices and spring-fallen charges hung in the canopy, ready to fall on anyone who disturbed a wire. But the most lethal instrument was indirect fire. Artillery registered to tree lines produced tree bursts, shells detonating in the canopy that sent metal slivers outward in horizontal sprays. The 1st Battalion of the 39th Infantry Regiment recorded more casualties from tree bursts than from direct small arms fire, an unusual and brutal statistic that commanders would later cite when debating tactics. In 2 weeks, the 9th Infantry Division reported more than 4,500 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. Casualties escalated as commanders sought to break the line with frontal attacks, local assaults, and costly probing drives. 1st Army staff, watching the casualty lists, took the decision on October 8th to commit additional forces. The 28th Infantry Division, a Pennsylvania National Guard unit led by Major General Norman Cota, himself a veteran of Omaha Beach, moved into the area. For the men who came next, Hürtgen would feel like a trap: narrow lanes that funneled movement, gullies that became kill zones, and weather that eliminated any possibility of rapid maneuver or effective armored support. The forest swallowed time, resources, and most painfully, human lives. By the end of the first campaign period, officers and NCOs were whispering the same grim verdict. The road they had followed into Hürtgen was a road that led only to hell. November 2nd, 1944. Rafflesbrand, Hürtgen Forest. If September was the opening chord, November was the long grinding resolve. The 28th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Bloody Buckets, entered the forest in staggered echelons. Its 3 regiments stepped forward under different commanders. the 109th Infantry Regiment under Colonel John F. Harrell, the 110th Infantry under Colonel Theodore Doyle, and the 112th Infantry under Colonel Carl Peterson. These soldiers were mostly National Guardsmen, men from towns and farms across Pennsylvania, moved now into a European theater where the terrain and enemy tactics punished every conventional move. Unknown to most American intelligence staffs, the sector they were entering was one of the most fortified stretches of the Siegfried Line. German defense in depth included units from the 116th Panzer Division, infantry from the 89th Infantry Division, and detachments of Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers who provided disciplined counterattack forces. The Germans were prepared to trade space for time and to exploit the vertical advantage of the trees. On November 5th, the 110th Regiment moved toward Schmidt, a village whose capture was essential for any drive onto the Erft Dam. Initial intelligence reports downplayed resistance. Operational messages described only remnants holding forward positions. Yet Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich August von der Heide, commanding German paratrooper elements, had pre-positioned troops for a decisive counterstroke. The Americans, advancing in narrow columns and fighting through barbed wire and mined approaches, found themselves suddenly under concentrated fire. The night before, elements of the 112th had taken Schmidt with minimal resistance. Dawn changed everything. The 116th Panzer Division, sometimes called the Windhund or Greyhound formation, counterattacked with Panzer IV tanks and Stu G3 assault guns. The forest roads could not support American Shermans. Where tanks could not go, infantry stood exposed. Within hours, battalions from the 112th were broken down to 80 to 100 effective soldiers each. Entire companies were scattered or consolidated into ad hoc groups to hold short stretches of ground. At 1st Army Headquarters, an operational log entry captured the scale of the collapse in terse language. "We no longer control the situation in the forest." The phrase appears in field diaries of staff officers and in letters from company commanders who tried to keep squad-level cohesion while senior leaders re-evaluated options. The cost was immediate and severe. The 109th Regiment lost nearly half of its officers in a matter of days. Private and non-commissioned reports, letters later archived in regimental histories, recorded the same human observations: wet clothes, frozen hands, men blindfolded by fog and fear. Lieutenant Robert S. Kenney of Company E wrote simply to a family member, "This place isn't meant for people. This isn't war, it's survival." Those words recur in post-war testimony. They are not rhetoric. They are the compressed memory of men who endured weeks of continuous pressure. German tactics leveraged every natural and engineered advantage, concealed minefields that funneled attackers into killing corridors, Regelbau bunkers, standardized concrete positions buried in gullies, artillery spotters on elevated limbs who corrected fire into the narrow approaches, and deliberate demolitions of bridges that turned roads into barriers. American units attempted flanking moves, coordinated artillery and close-in patrols, but every movement invited German observation and prepared fire. By November 12th, the 28th Infantry Division had become a formation in name but a shattered fighting force in fact. Of the roughly 15,000 men who had entered the forest, more than 6,000 were counted as casualties, killed, wounded, or missing. Commanders publicly and privately admitted the operation's failure to achieve its local objectives without unacceptable loss. The battle dragged on. In January 1945, fresh divisions, the 8th and 78th Infantry Divisions, rotated into Hürtgen, searching for ground the earlier forces could not hold. On February 10, 1945, elements of Major General Edwin P. Parker's 78th Division finally reached the Schwammenauel Dam. The Germans demolished gates and sluices before withdrawing. The tactical objective was achieved in form, but only after nearly 5 months of continuous combat. The final arithmetic of Hürtgen is stark. By official accounting, some 33,000 American casualties and roughly 28,000 German casualties were suffered in the campaign. Those numbers do not measure the exhaustion of units, the broken morale of small leadership cadres, or the ways the forest shaped memory. Strategically, the battle's value is debated. Practically, Hürtgen stands as one of the costliest operations the U.S. Army fought in Europe, a campaign where terrain, weather, and prepared defense exacted a toll that planners had neither fully foreseen nor effectively mitigated. Hürtgen Forest remains, Not a chapter of a textbook easily summarized, but a landscape of individual choices, of orders given and refused, of courage and loss carved into narrow lanes between trees. For those who survived, the phrase green hell endures because the forest took from them not only blood and equipment, but time, youth, and the simple certainty that when they stepped into those trees they were entering a place that would demand everything.